When despair envelopes the world, no matter how it is called out, the world remains chaotic and crazy, and people pray for the arrival of light. Until a beam of light sliced through the darkness. The traditional Cthulhu myth background. The protagonist is transformed into Ultraman through a system created by Hikari. Keywords of the novel. Ultraman in the K-series world with no pop-ups, Ultraman in the K-series world. Download the complete TXT collection, and read the latest chapters of Ultraman in the K-series world. Chapter 1. Preface Zhang Guang. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1 Preface. Light. The laws, interests, and emotions shared by humanity are both ineffective and meaningless in the face of the vast universe. Lovecraft, at that moment, I saw light. But I can't remember exactly what happened before. My memories have become blurred, and before the light arrived, I had already fallen into deep delirium. The chilling whispers surrounded me, filled with despair and madness. My brain was screaming, and the unbearable sharpness made me want to lose consciousness directly. This is completely beyond the range that humans can bear. I desperately want to escape the suffocating delusions, the crazy frenzy. But no matter what, I will be caught by those dry and sharp claws. Fragmented vision and vivid imagination surged towards me. A chaotic scream rang in my ear, and I couldn't even tell if it was something I posted or something else. My thoughts have become numb and sluggish. I shouldn't touch that disgusting sculpture, but before everything else dies, I want to work hard to leave something behind. I desperately use my chaotic brain to extract some useful things. My name is Howard Wilson. Before the beginning of everything, I was just an ordinary university lecturer. On the eve of Christmas this year, my supervisor sent me a brief letter, agreeing to my request and recommending me to the president of the University of Miskatonic for teaching ancient Chinese history. I sincerely expressed my gratitude to my supervisor in my reply. This is the best news for me. In recent years, I have been deeply trapped in the debt quagmire, trapped in those dirty financial traps. I have lost my previous job and wander all day in the gloomy sky of New York. Thanks to my mentor, he gave me an important opportunity. Even though I didn't have much research on ancient Chinese history before. To be honest, in my opinion, those small square characters are even more maddening than teaching Latin to those old antiques. Those mysterious Easterners are simply living in another world with us. But I have to admit that this job is my only hope now. Perhaps the mentor's letter opened a strange switch, and the day after Christmas, another person approached me. That is a strange woman dressed as a man in pants and a shirt, but wearing a strange and gorgeous black silk top hat. The top hat covered her eyes, and I had no idea what kind of scenery lay beneath that mysterious black veil. I don't know this strange lady. If I had seen such a unique and independent woman, would never have forgotten. It is obvious that this lady took the initiative to approach me. She said she knew I was an expert in identifying ancient cultural relics, and she was introduced by one of my students. The lady did not mention who the student was. I've been pondering for a while but haven't found any suitable candidates that fit the description. I don't think I'm any expert. It's just that there is a certain degree of research in this area, and if it is really compared to those famous scholars in the industry, it will really make a joke. I truthfully told this eccentric lady and sincerely suggested that she could find someone else. Although I haven't had a good time these past few years, I still met many people when I was pursuing a PhD at Harvard. The disappointment during this period has made my body and mind tired and lazy. I don't really want to deal with some cultural relics that come from unknown sources. I know that their excavations usually carry a bit of an unremarkable story. Professor Wilson, why don't you take a look first? The lady politely declined my offer. After all, this lady came directly to the door, or was introduced by someone else. Helplessly, I had no choice but to agree. The lady carefully took out a black wooden box from the package she carried with her. There is still a heavy lock hanging on the wooden box. The lady's attitude towards it was very strange, as if this box was Pandora's box, containing a disaster bestowed by the gods. At that time, I didn't pay much attention, which made me deeply regret it later on. What is inside the box is a small statue, and even the statue is not quite appropriate. Its size is like a toy for children to play with, which can be grasped with one hand. But the despicable statue is far from being a toy for children. At the moment the wooden box was opened, an indescribable and terrifying sense of oppression instantly filled the entire room. The gloomy and terrifying claws stuck tightly in my throat, making me completely breathless. I feel completely exposed to nothingness, without reservation, as if anyone can tear me apart. Something has set its sights on me. I stared fixedly at the terrifying sculpture inside the wooden box. That is a monster completely beyond human imagination. Even the most twisted and ferocious cult of heresy cannot shape such an extremely terrifying monster. Only with crazy associations can one barely see what kind of image this thing is, and the combination of dinosaurs, lizards, and dragons in some astonishing and terrifying way can barely reflect its charm. It has two incredibly large pointed horns on its head, a robust and agile tail that far exceeds its normal size, and its thick scales are definitely not something that any creature in the world can possess. There was a terrifying gleam in those terrifying eyes, even if it was just a statue. It's targeting me. The terror far beyond human endurance shattered my consciousness in an instant. That tyrannical aura from ancient times, even a little bit, is enough to crush the tiny human race. Genes that have been passed down from human beings for thousands of years are clamoring desperately. They are giant hunters and deserving predators. No matter how much human beings struggle in front of them, they are just shrimps and insects. It's targeting me. I don't know what the lady said later, nor do I know how she left. Since then, my mind has been severely affected, and fear has swept over me, repeatedly hitting me like a tide at every moment. Whether it's day or night, I can feel suffocation. I dreamed of a scene of flying sand and stones, a dark sky filled with sand and dust, a huge and ferocious existence roaring, smashing the earth into abyssal cracks. Human beings are just ants. Perhaps it was a hallucination, and in some uncertain location, there came a sound that I didn't know if it was sound. It was just a vague feeling, and I struggled to grasp a little bit of it, which was almost impossible to pronounce. Perhaps it was not human language at all. Gomorra, this may be a sentence, just a syllable, or nothing at all. I cannot think deeply about what this actually represents. Because I can't even think. Illusions and fears deeply shattered me. It's here again. It's here again. This time it's no longer a dream. I'm pretty sure this is not my hallucination, my madness. The oppression that sweeps through everything is simply impossible to exist in this world. The frenzy and barbarism from ancient times cannot be stopped by even the smallest humans. It's staring at me. At the last moment, my brain went blank. Perhaps I let out a piercing scream, or perhaps I was shocked and didn't say anything. Perhaps I am desperately trying to escape, or perhaps I am completely immobile due to fear. I watched as the terrifying horn aimed at me, and my eyes gradually plunged into darkness. No, in an instant, something appeared. Sunshine breaks through the night, dawn streaks across the horizon, a smooth silver-white palm caught me. That's not even a human palm, because that giant hand can easily protect me. At the end of my memory, I only saw those sun-like eyes. Perhaps their oval shape. Looking at me, at that moment, I saw light. This new book is a brand new attempt. Combine the Austrian worldview with the Croatian worldview. I am looking forward to what kind of sparks will be generated from the collision. That's right, I just really like these imaginative settings. And to some extent, Ultraman is also very suitable for the K series. You should know that the Ultraman boss, Cthulhu, is the son of General K in the prototype. Moreover, Chihiro Kanaka, one of the script writers of Diga, is also the world-recognized author of the Cthulhu myth. So, shouldn't the fusion of K and AO styles be excessive? End of this chapter. 2, Chapter 2 Hikari Number 1. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Chapter 2 Hikari Number 1 Professor Howard Wilson. The president of Miskatonic University looked at the new Professor Wilson in front of him through thick crystal lenses. The professor in front of him doesn't look very old, not yet 40. Perhaps his just shaved beard made him look younger, making him look like he's just over 30. The golden-framed glasses on his face added a lot of elegance to him. At this moment, he was turning his gaze as if he was looking around, with a strange and indescribable amazement in his honey-colored eyes. He seemed to be surrounded by a distant aura, with a feeling of being out of place. I remember you should still be enjoying your Christmas vacation at this time, right? Listening to the sound of authentic and fluent English with a hint of accent ringing in his ear, Professor Wilson seemed to have just realized and slowly shifted his gaze to the principal. He paused for a moment, as if organizing the language, or as if trying to recall something. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Principal. The tone I just spoke was still a bit sluggish, with a certain ancient charm, but soon this feeling seemed to diffuse into the air. Professor Wilson's face was squeezed with a bitter smile. I believe my supervisor, Professor Jones, has already told you about my recent experiences. I am now so embarrassed that I can no longer afford my rent in New York. I have to come to your school to report in advance. Recalling the recommendation letter, the principal understood with a hint of concern in his tone. Professor Wilson, your supervisor Professor Jones is a very reliable expert in ancient history research. Professor Jones strongly recommended your talent to me in the letter, and I am also willing to trust your abilities. You have praised me too much. Wilson pursed his lips with a hint of unnatural expression on his face. The principal smiled, raised his hand, signed his name on the document in front of him, stood up, and handed it to the professor in front of him. Welcome to join us, Miskatonic University is open to you. The principal was getting older and covered in gray, but he playfully blinked at Professor Wilson. She's a mysterious lady, he said. Professor Wilson gave a polite smile. This kind of smile is usually revealed when people understand a joke but don't find it funny, which can avoid mutual embarrassment. He doesn't quite understand the principal's humor. Now is the beginning of the 20th century. The principal may have noticed a slight awkwardness in Professor Wilson's expression and didn't say anything further. Wilson took his employment application document from the principal's hand and glanced at the principal's signature in the flower at the end. The handwritten English letters stick together and wrap around a few circles, which is completely difficult for those who are not familiar with floral designs to distinguish these letters. There is still a significant difference between printed and handwritten, especially in this messy posture with a unique personal style. Wilson's eyes froze for a moment, then he lifted his head as if nothing had happened and smiled slightly at the principal to conceal his subtle awkwardness. Thank you very much, Mr. Principal. The principal carefully examined the black-haired professor in front of him again, and the thick crystal glasses concealed the principal's deep gaze well, which was not noticed by Wilson. Subsequently, he showed a friendly smile and rang the pager at hand. If you have anything else to do next, you can contact Mr. Ball. He will arrange your apartment and office space. The principal said with a smile, he will also take you on a tour of our school. Mr. Ball immediately pushed open the door of the principal's office, where a weathered middle-aged man bowed slightly to Wilson. Oh, thank you very much for bringing my luggage over. Bauer brought Professor Wilson to his residence. Because it is still during the Christmas holiday, there are not many students on campus, and most of the faculty have also left the school. Mr. Ball is one of the few staff members who stayed at the school. He took Wilson to the teacher's apartment located in a corner of the University of Miskatonic. This is a beautiful 3-story small building, with red bricks and white tiles, quietly located next to the forest. The lawn downstairs seems to have been neglected for a long time, with weeds growing recklessly and scattered wildflowers blooming in the corners. Wilson was also surprised to find his wooden suitcase still in front of the door. Mr. Ball also took the initiative to help carry it to the second floor. Sorry to bother you. Wilson quickly expressed his gratitude. Mr. Ball took out the key and opened the door to the second-floor apartment. A gray and hazy smell rushed over my face. It's obvious that there hasn't been anyone living here for a long time. There are only some old-fashioned furniture inside, which is said to have been left behind by the previous professor after he left. There is also an old-fashioned printer that looks severely worn out. Apart from these miscellaneous items, there is only thick dust left. This is Wilson's next residence. He doesn't have much dissatisfaction either. At least better than being kicked out by the landlord in New York. When I think of the landlady pointing at his nose and cursing loudly, especially the authentic New York accent that was like a series of firecrackers and listening to heavenly books, Wilson couldn't help but feel heartbroken. For a person with a listening score of only about 100 on CET.4 and CET.6, this is simply torture. Fortunately, based on his fragmented physical memory and the landlord's expression, he roughly guessed what the landlord's aunt meant. He sorted out his relatively small luggage in a disheveled manner and ran non-stop to the University of Miskatonic to seek refuge. Otherwise, he can only sleep on the street now. That's right, it ran from New York to Massachusetts. Who said he doesn't have money to take a car? After giving him the key, Mr. Ball left. Wilson originally planned to clean this dusty room, but unfortunately he couldn't find a broom at all. The other floors of the apartment were also deserted, and it was already very late. This made Wilson extremely devastated. The smell of dust in my nose is choking, and every step I take raises a mane. Dust in the sky. In no time, all his remaining dignified black formal attire and leather shoes turned gray. The fact proves that things always get worse and worse. When Wilson saw the wooden bed covered in dust and even with a big hole, his expression had become numb. He took off his glasses, rubbed his temples, and whispered. Hikari 1. In front of him, a shimmering and dazzling light curtain quickly appeared, followed by a cold electronic sound. Zikali number 1 is at your service, respected Mr. Nank. Howard Wilson, no, his real name is Nanko. He was originally a happy young man, born in the 21st century, living under the red flag on the other side of the ocean since childhood. After graduation, he happily played 996 until he was bound by a system called Hikari 1. Thrown into the completely unfamiliar early 20th century United States, traveling thousands of miles to sleep on a broken bed is nothing. Nank's magnificent and unlucky journey has just begun. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Gomorra. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Gomorra. All of this starts with an unlucky guy who worked overtime until 2:30 in the morning in a parallel universe of the 21st century. Nank was originally just an ordinary company executive from the 21st century. Relying on his young age and tirelessly working at high intensity every day, he finally died suddenly in front of the computer on a dark and stormy night without taking a breath. After waking up again, he arrived at a mysterious space and was bound by a system. At the beginning, his first reaction was to be vigilant. There won't be any pies falling from the sky, and those dark texts are full of malicious systems or high-dimensional conspiracies. The origin of the system in novels has always been a mystery, and who knows if it is actually someone's arrangement behind it. The powerful force from the unknown is always so terrifying. Then, the system directly confessed its origins. It claims to be called Hikari 1 and was a system created by Hikari Ultraman, the chief scientist of the Land of Light in the M78 Nebula. After listening, Nank was stunned for a long time. Wait, you said you're from the Land of Light of the M78 Nebula. Nanko paused for a long time before finally speaking in disbelief. Didn't he see Ultraman when he was a child? He is still a loyal fan of Diga Ultraman. And Hikari. Isn't that the chief arms dealer of the Kingdom of Light? Rich in various black technologies, the spokesperson of Consortium B, half of the protagonists and villains in the new generation uses black technology. There are even rumors that if Hikari is shot, the universe can be half peaceful. The system provided a positive response and informed Nank. A universe is currently suffering from severe pollution, invading every corner of every aspect, and dark chaos is breeding here. When the Kingdom of Light observed that universe, it was already too late, and Ultraman represented that the power of light could not enter that universe at all. Even if forcibly entered, it would cause irreparable disaster to that universe. Just like adding boiling water to a hot oil pot. Hikari Ultraman created System 1, incorporating the power of Ultraman from the land of light and parallel worlds, and then allowing the system to select a human who believes in light from other worlds without Ultraman to enter the polluted universe. In short, it means choosing a warrior to save the world. System 1 has selected Nank. Nank couldn't figure out why Hikari No. 1 would choose him. He was indeed addicted to Diga Ultraman when he was a child. When Diga turned into a stone statue in the end, he opened up all the bright things in his home and longed to turn himself into light to help Diga. But since he grew up, he has already clearly realized that Ultraman is a tokusatsu produced by the Yanaga company, okay. Even though he watches the new AO every year, the latest Draga and Decai make him want to kill Jumaji. But he doesn't think these alone can make the system select him. He doesn't think he's a hero who can turn into light and save the world. Because you still believe in light, Hikari 1 replied. Really? Nank remained slightly wary. Okay, he admits that he still firmly believed in Ultraman's existence even after reaching adulthood. But if that's the case, aren't there still many people in this world who believe in light? Why choose him alone? Hikari 1 gave a positive answer. Mr. Nank, you believe in the existence of light and have an unwavering belief that you are capable of shouldering the power of the Ultraman warrior. Nank. What beliefs does he have? Stubbornly wanting to fish and make a mess. What if I don't want to? Nank raised an eyebrow and asked. This is your choice. Hikari 1 does not mean to buy or sell forcefully. The Kingdom of Light respects the wishes of others. If you refuse, the system will detach from the binding and choose a new host. Before unbinding, the system will repair your body. Your life will return to the right track. Nank was lost in thought, his eyes fixed. After hesitating for a moment, he asked, what's going on with that polluted universe? Due to the presence of pollution, the Kingdom of Light cannot observe that universe, replied Hikari 1 bluntly. Finding the cause of cosmic pollution will also be one of the host's tasks. The Kingdom of Light needs to find the source of pollution and prevent its spread. What kind of pollution is very dangerous? Nank asked. Yes, Hikari 1 did not conceal anything. For humans, this mission is very dangerous. Even some scenes of humans fleeing in a panic when monsters attacked were displayed, with buildings collapsing and the sky gray and hopeless. The danger of polluting the universe far exceeds these. Nank. He couldn't help but exclaim, this system is so sincere, should it be truly a product of the Kingdom of Light? Watching the humans struggling under the buildings on the screen. Especially one of the mothers, who risked her own body to protect her child. But under the roar of the monster, everything seemed meaningless. Subconsciously, Nank pursed his lips and frowned slightly. You said you carried the light of an Ultraman warrior. Nanko suddenly asked, does this mean I can become an Ultraman? Yes. There's nothing more to say, Nank Yang said with a relaxed and cheerful smile. I choose to accept this important task. Please make a cautious decision for the host. Whether to accept it or not. Yes or no, of course, Nanko pressed, yes, without hesitation. Who can refuse to become Ultraman? The overwhelming dizziness, indescribable nausea, and genuine madness swept through Nank's entire body in an instant. At first, it was okay. He walked through the mysterious and unpredictable void with ease. Then, he felt like he had been stuffed into a washing machine filled with smelly socks, stirred for 3 days and 3 nights, and then thrown into a stinky pond mixed with rotten corpses, fruits, and seafood to marinate and smell. Maggots had penetrated every part of his body. These disgusting, strange and crazy feelings almost drove Nank crazy. All of Nank's strange feelings were generated by his soul adapting to the rules of the world while crossing the barriers of the world. Hikari 1 had informed him in advance that when crossing the world barrier, it could not use the power of Auto, otherwise it would be repelled in light cases and mixed together in heavy cases to explode directly. Nank thinks it's not a big problem. Reality gave him a big mouth directly. At the first moment of arriving at this polluted universe, Hikari 1 quickly released the power of light to envelop Nanko's soul, slowly and firmly reshaping his body. Nank, surrounded by a warm halo, finally recovered. But before he could let go of his breath, Nank, who had just opened his eyes to see what kind of world it was, almost stared his eyeballs out. Wait. What did he see? That is a huge monster, ferocious and majestic, with pitch-black scales and 2 huge horns forming a crescent shape. It has thick limbs and sharp claws, and a strong and powerful tail trailing behind it. This is a monster that cannot exist in reality, a nightmare from underground. Ancient fears. The poor man not far from this monster let out a piercing and crazy scream, waving his hands but unable to move his steps no matter what, clearly frightened. Nank looked at everything in front of him in shock. He swore under his identity as an arcane fan for over a decade. He would never mistake the very typical monster in front of him. Lying trough. Isn't this TM Gomorra? End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Transforming into Diga. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Transforming into Diga. Gomorra is a very famous monster in the Ultraman series, with high popularity, strong strength, and a domineering appearance. Because he has helped Ultraman many times, he is deeply loved by his fans. Even the new generation Zeta Ultraman killed an innocent awakened Gomorra, which caused a lot of dissatisfaction among people. But let's not talk about these. Gomorra is a truly fierce monster. The destructiveness is not ordinary. Still the first monster to appear and defeat Ultraman. The first Ultraman suffered from exhaustion in the hands of Gomorra. In the battle of the great monster, it demonstrated astonishing combat power. The strength can be said to be very strong. Give him some time, even a city can be razed. Even destroying a country is not a problem. It is definitely a fatal disaster for humanity. Feeling Gomorra's fierce and violent aura firsthand, Nank's face turned slightly pale. This is not a tokusatsu drama, it's a truly terrifying monster, with its enormous size bringing an unparalleled sense of oppression. The earth seemed to be torn apart by Gomorra. Facing such a powerful monster unexpectedly is not friendly at all for the vegetable chicken player. It was not until facing Gomorra personally that Nanko truly realized that all of this was not a delusion before his death. He was indeed brought to another world by the system. The scream coming from the monster's roar caught Nanko's attention. Nank then noticed the unlucky guy in front of Gomorra. That is a person with a disheveled face, a messy beard, dirty clothes on his body, and his whole body is still dancing nervously. Although Gomorra was right in front of him, he was just crazily pulling his hair, staring at the huge monster with his eyes wide open and a face full of fear, as if he was fixed there. Watching Gomorra about to crush that unlucky guy into pulp. Nank rushed over without even thinking about it. But he still has a considerable distance from that unlucky guy. It's too far. He didn't have time at all. Number 1. Nank almost roared out. As he ran, bursts of dazzling light erupted around him. The light curtain in front of me quickly expanded into a light gate. Needless to say, Nank ran into the light gate. The boundless light enveloped him. Nank ignored his thoughts and instinctively rushed towards the most familiar and intimate light. The light also responded very awesome. Diga. The sunlight pierced through the night and dispelled the terrifying evil intent. Nank reached out and caught the unlucky guy who was about to faint, easily protecting him. Ignoring the immense power within his body, Nank carefully held his palm, carefully protecting the tiny human from harm. Little by little, the unlucky guy was placed on a safe clearing in the distance. This is extremely difficult for him. He is not yet very accustomed to this sudden acquisition of powerful power, and this feeling is like a baby suddenly turning into a superhero. If he is not careful, he may pinch the human in his hand into a pancake. Nank completed all of this with great trepidation. I just breathed a sigh of relief. Then he opened his hands in surprise and looked at his silver-white hands and the red and purple intertwined patterns on his arms. These hands are so powerful that Nank can be sure that he can knock the mountain down with just one slap, and an ordinary stone in his hand is probably similar to rubber mud. Although he suddenly grew many times larger and gained tens of thousands of tons in weight, he did not feel the heaviness of his body. Instead, he felt very light and even more agile than his original body. It seems that as long as he wants to, he can directly overcome gravity and fly out. This is simply not scientific. His vision became very clear and expansive, even the veins on distant leaves could be clearly seen. The perspective is also very high, looking at the ground is like standing on a dozen or so floors and looking down. Fortunately, he is not someone who is afraid of heights, Ultraman. The whole world seemed completely different, and a huge amount of information rushed into his mind in an instant. Normal people couldn't handle it, but for him now, everything was so easy. Is this Diga Ultraman? Nank was lost in the excitement of becoming an idol and the pleasure of gaining power, which was such an exciting and novel experience for him. However, the next moment, bang, accompanied by a powerful impact, Nanko felt his waist instantly hit by a sharp object, and the intense pain and inertia made him face down towards the ground. There's that human down here. Nank endured the pain and fell fiercely to the other side, hitting trees one by one, raising waves of dust. Fortunately, the person he saved is fine. It's just bad luck with the trees under him. Compared with tens of thousands of tons of giants, the trees with big buckets are as easily pressed as foam. When he fell, he saw a small wooden house in the forest. Fortunately, there was no one inside. Without considering setting up the wooden house, Nank covered his waist in pain, and a carp stood up straight, learning from the memory of Diga and gesturing, staring intently at Gomorra in front of him. This monster is actually launching a surprise attack. Don't talk about martial arts. Gomorra doesn't care about so much. It is a complete monster. His pale eyes stared straight at the suddenly emerging big guy in front of him. There were waves of disgust and annoyance emanating from the opponent's body, and just looking at it made it extremely irritable, making it want to tear everything in front of it at all costs. Roar! Gomorra waved her sharp claws and let out a sharp roar, her tail flapping incessantly behind her, raising flying sand all over the sky. It lowered its head and aimed the sharp corners of its nose at the silver giant. This thing is also something that just ambushed Nank from behind. Nank's heart thumped. If he remembers correctly, the most important aspect of fighting Gomorra is its horns and tail. Gomorra is able to pierce the opponent's body with horns and emit strong vibrational energy inside the horns, causing them to explode and die. This is called a super vibration wave. Should he be grateful that he didn't use this move when Gomorra attacked just now? Nank felt bitter in his heart. So why is the monster he first faced such a terrifying existence? He's not one of the new generation of cheating guys. Why not be beginner teaching monsters like Gorzan and Melba? He's not as good as Daegu, he doesn't even have a beginner's tutorial for Diga. I don't even know how to emit light. Even so, Nanko still pretended to be calm and showed his hand, even provocatively greeting Gomorra twice. Come on. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Combat. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 Combat. When Nank's words came out of Dija's mouth, they turned into a powerful roar. Gomorra may not be able to understand what Nanko was saying, but it was clearly provoked. It roared and charged straight towards Nank. Nank's heart tightened and he quickly wanted to dodge on his side. For a person who grew up in a peaceful environment from childhood to adulthood, and has received the most serious training, the Taekwondo class where their parents pinned their heads down and reported when they were young, don't expect him to have any combat skills. Before he could dodge Gomorra's impact, his thick and fierce tail mercilessly swept down his calf. The power on Gomorra's tail was not a joke, as Nanko stumbled on the spot and fell to the ground again. Now Gomorra didn't give him time to catch his breath and stand up. He immediately lifted his short leg and stepped hard on the giant's belly. Nank curled up in pain. The power brought by transformation greatly improved his perception ability, and it was also a monster-level attack. Ordinary humans would have been beaten up by such attacks. Now he greatly admires his predecessors in his heart, how strong his willpower was to face these terrifying monsters without fear for the first time. Nank dispelled the chaotic thoughts in his mind, disregarding the physical pain, and struggled to hold the leg that was still stepping on him, using all his strength to lift it away. Perhaps in response to his inner call, the originally red and blue color on the silver and white giant's body instantly transformed into a brilliant and fiery red. With such great strength, Gomorra was caught off guard and thrown upside down. Without time to think about how he transformed into a powerful type, Nank let out a loud shout and punched Gomorra's nose. Gomorra's nose and tail are quite strong, but it is precisely because of this that its weakness is also here. As long as its nose and tail are cut off, its attack power will be greatly weakened. Nank's punch unleashed all the strength of the powerful type. At this moment, he seemed to be possessed by the Diga deity, transforming into a complete broken horn demon. Under Diga's fists weighing tens of thousands of tons, even the incredibly hard corners of his nose were forcefully broken. Diga. Full marks. Gomorra let out an extremely piercing roar, angrily waving its claws and breaking its horns, making it even more violent. The huge tail behind him kept patting towards Nank, each time like a landslide, raising countless dust and destroying one tree after another. Even if he wanted to avoid such a dense attack, he couldn't avoid it. Nank dodged the tail's attack in a disheveled manner and had to be careful to steer Gomorra aside to prevent the battle from affecting the ordinary human he had saved. Every attack that hit him burst out with a dazzling light, and at the same time, he could feel as if he was becoming increasingly struggling. The chest gradually tightened. The limbs are becoming increasingly sluggish. The originally light feeling seemed to be gradually disappearing, and gravity recaptured him. A weight of tens of thousands of tons is not a joke. Drop, 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 drop. Nank looked at her chest in surprise while hiding. Hello, Hikari 1. Nank questioned the system in Ultraman's transformation exclusive small black room. I just transformed, at most it's only over a minute. Isn't it less than 3 minutes? Why is there not enough energy? I'm sorry, Mr. Nank. The system consumed most of its power while traveling through the world, and now it's completely unable to sustain enough transformation time. The cold electronic sound of Hikari 1 even carried a hint of anxiety. Nank felt bitter inside. He finally understood the danger of the task. Indeed, saving the world is not something that a salted fish like him can afford. Is he going to explain it here today? It's not a shame to experience the feeling of transforming into Ultraman before death. And he at least saved one person. Damn it, still unwilling to accept it. It's not easy to have a chance. Nank pounced and hugged Gomorra's tail, with a huge inertia that almost threw him away, but he remained steadfast in his embrace and never let go. Gomorra's tail, swaying back and forth, was held by tens of thousands of tons of Ultraman, losing its original agility. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Nank exerted all his strength to suckle and threw Gomorra out with his tail in his arms. The monster has smashed a new hole into the poor earth. The chest timer flickered even more violently. The suffocating feeling tightly gripped his chest. Nank, relying on instinct and memory, crossed his arms and formed them on his chest, squeezing every energy inside his body, transforming everything into light and emitting it. The bright and dazzling light has extremely strong penetrability, instantly piercing through the dim sky, setting off an incredibly bright surroundings and piercing through Gomorra's scales. Not enough. These powers are not enough to eliminate the monster. Nank tried his best to maintain the light, trying to release all the energy. Warning! Warning! Energy is about to run out. A rapid warning sounded in his ear, and Hikari 1 became particularly excited. Warning! Warning! The consequences of energy depletion are severe. Despite the warning from the system, Nank continued to emit light recklessly. In the end, Gomorra's body was pierced by light and exploded into brilliant fireworks. The indicator light on Nank's chest is completely off. The giant transformed into scattered light and dissipated into the darkness. Some of the light reluctantly gathered together and turned into an Asian man with black hair and eyes. Nank stared blankly at his almost transparent body, floating like a ghost in the ruins of the forest. If he remembers correctly, wasn't he like this when he first traveled? Before Nanko could ask what was going on with the system, the voice of Hikari 1 sounded angrily. What a mess. Your body after crossing is completely condensed by the power of Ultraman. You have exhausted all your strength now, even the human form of the body cannot be sustained. Ah. Nank is confused. As soon as he put it on, he encountered a battle and didn't pay much attention to it. Your soul has been stained with light. Once the power to maintain your body disappears, the pollution of this universe will instantly erode you. When the two conflict, you will directly turn into fireworks. Hikari 1 shouted angrily at Nanko. It's still the electronic sound, but it's no longer cold at this moment. So. How long can this last? Nank's almost transparent gaze drifted with a guilty expression. 3 minutes. There's no way to save it, wait until death. Nank tearlessly tugged at the corners of his mouth. There's another way. Hikari's helpless voice rang out again. What's the solution? Nank raised his eyebrows and stared intently at the light curtain in front of him. Can you go find your human body? Hikari 1 reminded, you should know what human body means. Where should I go to find the human body from this wilderness? Before Nank could finish speaking, he suddenly realized something and quickly used his own body to float to the side of the person he had saved before. Even though Nanko has tried his best to avoid the battle from affecting the opponent. But thinking about it all knows that a tiny human cannot be unaffected by the battle between two behemoths. As a cute new Nank, he doesn't even know the protective skills of his predecessors at present. This person is in a deep coma, half of his body pressed under the tree. Chi is like a flowing thread, even if sent for emergency treatment now, it may not be able to be saved. This is my fault. Nank looked deep and desperate at the dying human in front of him. He grabbed his hair with great regret. I choose to share my life with him. Are you sure? Yes or no? Yes. Nank's illusory body slowly integrated into the human body. The man who was on the brink of death under the tree gradually breathed more slowly, and as his eyelashes trembled gently, he opened a pair of wax-colored eyes. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Human Body. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Human Body. Three-dimensional facial features, pale skin, typical European face. Underneath the vintage gold-framed eyes are unfamiliar light-colored eyes. The only thing that made him slightly familiar was his black hair. Nank pursed her lips and looked at her unfamiliar self in the mirror. This is him now. Professor Howard Wilson, born in 1888 from an engineering family in Ohio, graduated from Harvard University with a Ph.D. in world history, an expert in ancient research, and a former professor at Brown University. I was tricked into resigning by a financial expert and went to the New York Stock Exchange to operate stocks, but ended up losing everything. I had to sell my car and property in my hometown to barely pay off my debts, and pitifully huddled in a small rental house in New York. Thanks to the help of my mentor and friends, I didn't starve to death in a rented house. Looking back at the unfortunate past of Professor Wilson, Nanko has some heart attacks. From his perspective as a future person, that scam is simply full of loopholes, even teenagers cannot deceive. I don't know if Professor Wilson is foolish in reading, however. Nank let out a long sigh. Professor Wilson's resume in the first half of his life is indeed quite impressive. PhD from Harvard University, professor from prestigious universities, expert in ancient studies. Every name chosen is a source of immense pressure for ordinary graduates of Nank. After all, Professor Wilson has become his human body, sharing a life with him, and he must bear Professor Wilson's social responsibility. Fortunately, Professor Wilson teaches ancient Chinese history at the University of Miskatonic, which can be considered a professional match for Nanko, who grew up on the other side of the ocean. Nank patted his face, and Professor Wilson in the mirror did the same. "Ah, now I am you. I will take good care of your body. Please give me more advice, Professor Wilson." Nank looked at the mirror with disappointment, then at the light curtain beside him, and asked in a deep voice, "Hikari 1, when will life solidification technology be completed?" Life solidification technology is also a research achievement of Hikari Ultraman, which is a black technology that Nanko completely cannot understand. This is still an invention that Hikari had a long time ago. This technology can be said to be a truly groundbreaking invention. Simply put, it truly solidifies life and can bring it back to life. Being able to fix and concretize life energy, forming concrete substances. Then injecting this substance into the body of a dead organism can directly revive life. As a system produced by Hikari, Hikari 1 naturally installed this technology. Nank plans to use this technology to revive Professor Wilson. Professor Wilson has long been half dead, and the reason why he can still bounce around now is entirely supported by him. To completely save Wilson, he must be given a new life. Just like the human body of the first Ultraman, Asada Gene. Based on the existing level of technology and energy resources, it is expected to take 10 years. Sigh. Nank shook his head again. This was within his expectations. After all, this is the beginning of the 20th century, and the Second Industrial Revolution has just ended, without the unreasonable black technology of the Kingdom of Light. The system has been very efficient for 10 years in order to carve out a life from scratch. There is no magical black technology in the arcade here, let alone any specialized department to resist monsters. At first, Nank thought he had traveled to a country where he lived a good life. Who would say that every time the monster's destination was there? Where are Ultraman's classic home games also located? After fusing Wilson's memories, Nanko realized that he had gone through a split. He traveled to the United States in the 20th century, in 1923, which was exactly 100 years away from his original timeline. At this point in time, the technology tree has made significant progress through technological revolution. But at this level, not even a nuclear weapon has been developed. It's not enough to break through Gomorra's defense. Don't even think about the dark technology of the Earth Defense Force. He can only rely on the system to save his life. Just 10 years. Nank pinched Wilson's face and let out a bitter smile. This guy is really a real unlucky guy. Poor thing, he's going to sleep for 10 years. Is there any way to accelerate the speed? Nanko inquired inquiringly about Hikari 1. If there is high-level life energy, it can accelerate the process. Hikari 1's tone returned to plain. Where can I find high-level life energy? Nank complained softly. Although he had just arrived in this world and was not very familiar with it, he could roughly judge from Wilson's memory that it was an ordinary world, at least in Wilson's memory, just like before. Perhaps it was precisely because of this that Wilson was so frightened when he first saw such a terrifying monster. After Wilson became his human body, he was also able to share the other person's memories to a certain extent. But for him, it's like watching a movie, not very empathetic. He was puzzled why Wilson was so scared when he saw Gomorra's spark doll, and then went completely insane afterwards. If it weren't for the mentor's letter arriving before this, Nanko wouldn't even be able to reach the University of Miskatonic. That's right, Wilson hasn't identified the origin of the statue brought by the mysterious woman. But Nanko could tell at a glance that it was Gomorra's spark doll. Of course, it's not the rubber toys sold to children before the time travel, but the genuine Gomorra dolls. This also brings a very suspicious issue. Why are there spark dolls here? What does this have to do with Al, the dark foundation in the Ultraman universe that turns Ultraman and monsters into spark dolls? What does the so-called pollution in this world refer to? Nank had also inquired about Hikari 1 before, but the system was also unclear. A pile of question marks pressed against Nanko's mind, causing Wilson's face to visibly contort. Alas, we can only temporarily put these issues on hold. Nank melancholically took out an old piece of clothing from the suitcase, simply swept the dust off the bed, tried to ignore the big hole, and fell asleep exhausted. After tinkering for so long, he is really too tired. New York suburbs, what exactly happened here? A middle-aged man dressed in ordinary clothes was just about to return to his small wooden house in the suburbs when he saw a scene in front of him as if a natural disaster had struck. Countless trees have fallen, some even flattened under pressure. One big pit after another, the earth clearly suffered unbearable heavy damage. The middle-aged man swallowed his saliva and tried to keep himself calm. He picked up a branch and struggled to climb into the largest pit that still had a burnt smell. They are all messy and burnt black marks, emitting a pungent smell. Middle-aged people constantly feel fear rising in their hearts. A creepy forest cold climbed up his collar. But he still headed towards the big pit with a fascination. The area was covered with countless dirt and burnt paste, but the middle-aged man ignored it and reached out to dig hard. What did you dig up? He lifted the mysterious sculpture in his hand like a treasure, with a look of fanaticism and greed in his eyes. That is a monster beyond human imagination, blending horror from ancient times. However, the corner on the nose of this statue seems to have broken. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Library. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Library Miskatonic University is located in the picturesque town of Arkham, Massachusetts. The school is at the forefront of the world in fields such as archaeology, mysticism, history, and psychology. Advanced teaching facilities and strong teaching staff. It is an Ivy League school on par with Harvard University, University of Pennsylvania, Yale University, and others, founded in 1690. But in the original world, Nanko had never heard of the name of this university. In theory, he should have heard from his classmates who went abroad about such a powerful university to some extent. And this university is still located in Acom Town. To be ashamed, the first impression that the name Acom gave him was the talented Acom Mental Hospital in Gotham City, which has a simple and honest culture. The first time he heard it, he almost thought he had come to a universe that often restarts at the beginning of D. Then he realized that he was overthinking it, and in this world, Acom should really be an ordinary and simple town with a simple folk culture. Perhaps it's just a difference between different universes. It is normal for different universities to appear in different universes. Nank didn't think much either. This is not something worth noting. On the first day of officially arriving at the University of Miskatonic, Nanko woke up early. The unfamiliar ceiling. Nank made a sarcastic remark and played a joke. Last night was his first night in this world where he finally managed to lie down and rest. I didn't sleep well. A hard bed with a big hole is simply torture for humans. We must replace this broken bed and buy a new set of bedding. At the thought of this, Nank couldn't help but feel heartbroken. No matter which world he enters, will he never escape the fate of poverty? Diligently earning a meager salary before crossing over is enough. Wilson, this unlucky guy, couldn't even find a penny all over his body, and the thoroughly poor guy started the game. At present, it's only slightly better than sleeping on the street. At least Mita has provided him with a place to stay. I don't know if Mita can advance his salary. Nank patted his cheek, trying to clear himself up. He remembers that before crossing the border, the local units that introduced talents would provide resettlement fees. I don't know if there are similar measures in this unfamiliar time and space. Otherwise, he would have starved to death before being killed by the monster. Ultraman doesn't need to eat, he can live with light, but he doesn't. On the journey from New York to Arkham, he barely relied on the system to convert light energy, but this was not a long-term solution. Nank obediently got up from the bed, and this broken bed was not worth him lying on. After taking care of myself briefly, I left my residence with a gloomy expression on my face. The sky outside was a bit gloomy with no sunlight, making the entire school appear lifeless, which also made Nank's mood even worse. He wandered aimlessly, focusing on observing the surroundings. It has to be said that the scenery of this university is excellent, nestled by mountains and rivers, and the environment is excellent. Compared to the hazy air before crossing, the air is much better. Exquisite small buildings are located on flat and open land, with all kinds of facilities readily available. The shrubs on both sides of the road have also been carefully cultivated. Studying here is probably a very relaxing and enjoyable experience. This was a higher education institution that he couldn't even imagine before crossing over. And now he turns out to be a professor at this university. That's really interesting. Nank sighed and walked slowly along the road in front of the apartment towards the tallest building in sight. He had just arrived here and was unfamiliar with everything, so he casually found the most prominent building. I happen to have nothing to do, go and see where that is. At the fork in the road, he stopped and compared the map signs at the intersection, then looked at the buildings in the distance and made a simple comparison. So that's the library. The walls outside the library are overall black with pointed roofs, creating a Gothic-like architectural style. Even when viewed from the outside, it exudes an extraordinary aura, exuding a quaint and weathered aura that makes Nank feel the weight of history and culture. Nank raised his eyebrows with great interest. If it's a library, maybe there's something you're looking for inside. In Wilson's memory, the vast library collects precious books from all over the world, with millions of books. With a long history and profound heritage, it is a precious cultural asset of human civilization. Maybe you can find some clues about pollution inside, and there are also traces of monsters. Having made up her mind, Nank quickened her pace and walked straight to the entrance of the library. A lazy black dog was tied to the door, blocking Nank's footsteps. Looking at the large black dog, Nank stopped in an instant. He silently played the drums of retreat in his heart. When he was a child, he was fiercely bitten by the big black dog raised by his grandparents, and from then on, he had a natural psychological shadow towards creatures like dogs. How about next time? Just as Nank was hesitating, the big black dog suddenly felt something and lifted its head, examining Nank not far away with its shiny black eyes. Nank is ready to leave from here. However, the big black dog seemed to have seen a friendly friend, excitedly wagging its tail and making a muffled sound through its nose, which was a friendly expression from the dog. Nank blinked somewhat inexplicably. The big black dog, which looked very fierce and could bite people to death, was now sticking out its tongue and wagging its tail at him, and even the black bean had a hint of anticipation in its eyes. After thinking for a moment, Nank cautiously walked forward, reached out his hand, and tentatively touched the head of the big black dog. The big black dog happily barked twice and licked Nank's hand. Originally, it just looked quite fierce. Nank breathed a sigh of relief and touched the dog's head again. It seemed that this dog had a very gentle temper. Did someone come so early? At that moment, the door of the library was suddenly pushed open, and an elderly man with a gray head walked out. He was even more surprised to see the black-haired professor standing in front of the door, as well as the big black dog who was inexplicably excited. "It seems that the sheriff really likes you," the old man murmured in a surprised tone. "Hello," Nank quickly withdrew his hand from masturbating the dog's head and awkwardly coughed. "Masking other people's dogs in front of others seems impolite. Is this child called the sheriff? A very domineering name. He also has a good temper," Nank politely praised. Watching the big black dog sheriff happily circling around Nank, the white-haired old man's gaze became even more peculiar. This big black dog is usually ferocious to everyone, especially when some people carry something strange. They are eager to rush up and bite to death. How obedient is it now, like a gentle shepherd dog? Cough. "Hello, nice to meet you. I am Howard Wilson, a new professor of ancient Chinese history." As he watched the old man with white hair remain silent for a while, Nank had to extend his hand and introduce himself first. Henry Armitage, the director of the Orne Library at the University of Miskatonic. The old man with white hair also came to his senses and kindly took Wilson's hand. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Amitic Curator. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Amitic Curator. Director Amitic was somewhat surprised by the guests who visited today. We are currently on Christmas vacation and there is still over a week before the start of school. There are hardly any people on campus, only some people who usually live in Arkham will come to the library. And now it's 6 o'clock in the morning, and the sky isn't very bright. However, even so, he shook hands with Professor Wilson in a friendly manner and said, "Good morning, nice to meet you, Professor Wilson." Under his golden-framed glasses, Wilson's eyes narrowed slightly. The librarian. Faced with Amitic's graying hair and beard, as well as his imposing scholarly demeanor, he couldn't help but think of his high school homeroom teacher. "Good morning," Wilson struggled to maintain a smile on his face, unsure of how to start the conversation. He instinctively asked, "Have you eaten?" Amitic Curator hesitated for a moment before answering, "Have you eaten it?" Director Amitic didn't understand why such a stranger suddenly asked him if he had breakfast. The ancient history professor in front of him stiffened for a moment after asking that question, and his polite smile shattered slightly. "I was careless and forgot that this is not the country on the other side of the ocean at all. I wouldn't say that when greeting here on weekdays." The director of Amity squinted his eyes and noted down this peculiarity. "Are you here to look for any information?" However, Director Armitage did not continue to stand by the door and chat with Wilson, but instead led him sideways into the library. Professor Wilson couldn't help but marvel at the neatly arranged bookshelves, the neatly coated books, and the peaceful and solemn atmosphere. "Your school's library is really beautiful," Wilson praised. "Our school library is renowned in Massachusetts for its rich collection," Director Amity introduced with a smile and a hint of pride in his tone. "Although not as old as Harvard University's library, it still has enough historical heritage. This is his first time visiting such a large library." However, Professor Wilson often spent time in the Harvard University reading room during his studies. He nodded politely on the side. "I don't know what type of bibliography Professor Wilson is looking for." Amity, the curator, is in a good mood. "Perhaps I can help. Is there any relevant information about ancient Chinese research?" Almost, Professor Wilson said vaguely, hesitating for a moment, pretending to mention it casually. "Actually, before I arrived at the University of Miskatonic, a person introduced by my student showed me a mysterious sculpture. The technique of sculpture carving is very powerful, making that sculpture lifelike. I even felt for a moment that it was alive, as if the carved beast was staring at me intently." Professor Wilson's brow furrowed slightly as he recalled the vague and fragmented delirium. The last memories of this unlucky person are all messy. "I don't even know when I went to that small forest in the suburbs. I don't know how the massive Gomorra actually emerged." He could only reluctantly sort through those bad memories and extract some seemingly useful clues. He felt that the Amitic curator in front of him had been managing such a large library for so many years, making it convenient to access various confidential information through the library. He also looked very knowledgeable, and perhaps there might be some useful clues. Amitic, the curator, listened to Professor Wilson's words and the wrinkled corners of his eyes jumped fiercely. This description instantly sparked an ominous speculation in his heart. He quickly spoke, his tone becoming sharper. What does that statue look like? Professor Wilson pushed his glasses, deliberately appearing anxious and anxious. I don't know how to describe it, it's not a monster that should exist in the real world at all. He spoke out all the impressions of the unlucky human body on the Gomorra spark doll in its original form. I can't pinpoint where that sculpture actually comes from, Wilson said with a bitter smile. That's beyond my knowledge of ancient research. I've never seen anything similar before. Director Amitic nodded solemnly. He silently observed Professor Wilson's subtle expression. Every small change in expression and facial expression is fully visible. Everything Professor Wilson said doesn't seem to be fake, and the description of the sculpture and the panicked expression seem to have been truly experienced. But the director of Amitic still feels a bit strange. Occasionally, Wilson's fleeting expression was more like that of an observant observer. Out of place with the whole world. But soon this strange thing disappeared, as if it was just an illusion. Since then, I have been surrounded by nightmares. Wilson swallowed his saliva, expressing fear and unease in his eyes. I even dreamed that the carved monster had turned into a monster as high as a mountain, and I was so scared that I went crazy. During this time, my memories were completely confused, as if I had fallen into madness. It wasn't until a few days ago that I regained my consciousness. What Wilson said is true, it's just that he concealed his existence. I know. Wilson let out a long sigh. You might think that these are just absurd stories I've made up, or maybe I've fallen into crazy dreams. Even I am completely unsure of what it is. But I still want to find clues about that monster. Perhaps you'll think I'm crazy. No. Amitic, the curator, spoke with a serious and solemn expression. He walked into Wilson's body and patted his shoulder. I believe you. I have known some people who, like you, have encountered strange and insane events beyond human imagination. Before Wilson could continue to describe more with emotion, he unexpectedly got a clue from Amitic. The brewing emotions were quickly suppressed, almost causing him to suffer an internal injury. He stared at Director Amitic in disbelief and said, "Are you saying? I think you may need some help," Amitic pondered. Nightmares are not easy to get rid of. His human body did indeed have nightmares every day after seeing the statue of Gomorra. Wilson remained silent. Follow me. Director Amitic turned around and gestured for Wilson to follow. Wilson was stunned for a moment, unsure of what the other person wanted to do. But he still followed behind Director Amitic. He was curious about what kind of surprise the Amitic curator, who seemed to know something, could bring him. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Requiem Fragrance. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Requiem Fragrance. Director Amitic brought Wilson to his office. The office is very clean and tidy, with only a wooden desk and a bookshelf on the wall behind it. It was densely packed with literature books that Wilson couldn't understand. What came rushing towards me was a dusty atmosphere of books and a faint smell of tobacco, not too unpleasant. The style of the decoration is different from the principal's office he saw before, clearly with some special elements, such as the murals hanging on the wall that he couldn't quite understand, which have a unique and strange style. After Wilson entered, Director Amitic specially locked the doors and windows, looking extremely serious. Wilson hesitated for a moment and tentatively asked, "Mr. Amitic, who are you?" "It's nothing, just to ensure that the next thing goes smoothly," said Director Amitic calmly in a terrifying voice. Wilson frowned slightly, staring at the serious senior scholar in front of him with a puzzled and skeptical gaze. At this moment, his mind is filled with strange ideas from the 21st century. Chamber of Secrets murder case. Did he accidentally come into contact with another side of the world and be eliminated by the mastermind behind it? Or is it that this curator wants to plot against him? He is so poor that he only has a few decent clothes and some scattered small things all over his body, and there may not be anything worth thinking about besides. It's my first time meeting director Amitic, or is it that the curator of Amitic saw his potential and chose him as the magical girl? Unfortunately, I have already become Ultraman, otherwise it wouldn't be impossible. He actually wants a cute rainbow pony more. Wilson suppressed his chaotic thoughts, took a deep breath, and used his superb acting skills to portray the image of an ordinary person who had encountered an unusual event. I don't know, Mr. Armitage. What exactly do you mean? Wait a moment, Amitic curator apologized, then took out a strange triangular incense cone from somewhere and lit it. The white smoke slowly flowed down from the bottom like a stream, spreading along the desk to the ground, and then dissipated into the air. At some point, a faint fragrance added to the air. It's not a common taste of rose salons in the West, but rather a mysterious and melodious scent that leans towards the east, like sandalwood. Wilson remembers visiting a local temple before the college entrance examination, where the pungent scent of sandalwood was so strong that it choked people. Although the flavors here are very similar, there are still some differences, as if there is an extra sweet and greasy taste, light and soothing, not strong. Wilson's expression relaxed unconsciously. This is a gift from a friend of mine from China, Amitic curator explained briefly. This fragrance has a calming and soul-calming effect, which is very effective for people with nightmares. My friend calls it the Requiem fragrance. Watching Wilson gradually relax, Director Armitage's serious expression on his face eased a bit. What he didn't say was that this fragrance has another effect. It can stabilize the soul of the body itself and soothe the restless soul. However, once the soul and body do not match and are intervened by the outside world, intense exclusion phenomena will occur. According to his Chinese friend, this was specially developed by their sect to prevent some evil spirits from taking advantage of the situation and eroding humanity. Although the big black dog sheriff, who was guarding the door, was very friendly to Wilson and his behavior logic was clear, it didn't seem like he was in a frenzy. But out of careful consideration, the curator of Amity decided to light one of the few Requiem incense sticks. Being careful and cautious is extremely important to them. You can win them countless times, but as long as you lose once, it will never be able to be undone. Requiem incense is actually flawed. Long-term use can lead to addiction. Once stopped, one will experience an extremely painful withdrawal reaction and become obsessed with the tranquility it brings. Everything outside, even the sound of others breathing, can become a nightmare for the user. If used only in small quantities, the problem is not significant. Ah! Is it China? Wilson murmured unconsciously under this soothing aroma, his tone somewhat inexplicable, but soon he was startled and immediately shifted the focus. The name Requiem fragrance is quite nice. Wilson yawned lightly amidst the relaxing aroma. Worth the name, he really wants to sleep now. The rest these days is really terrible. But now is not the time to sleep at all, he must pick himself up. He still doesn't know what he just experienced. I don't know if I show any abnormalities in the Requiem fragrance, then the thing on his face that's attacking him is likely an old seal. Director Armitage is so sharp that even if what he says is true, he perfectly portrays Professor Wilson's mindset. But what is played is ultimately what is played. He couldn't understand that feeling without experiencing Wilson's past firsthand. Thanks to him, he didn't sacrifice Wilson's body. He simply shared his life with Wilson, making it his human body. From then on, they only had one life, and he is now Professor Wilson. It's amazing, isn't it? Director Amitic's expression softened as he looked at Professor Wilson in front of him with a smile. The power comes from the mysterious East. You should know better than me, don't you? You are a professor of ancient Chinese history. Upon hearing Director Armitage's words, Wilson paused for a moment, maintained his calm expression, and said calmly, "Well, Chinese culture is vast and profound, and what I know is only superficial." As a native descendant of a flower grower, Nank cannot be said to be very familiar with traditional Chinese culture, let alone a foreigner. Wilson doesn't want to continue on this topic. He is afraid that the more he talks about topics he is familiar with, the higher he gets, and then he accidentally cuts through. You seem to be very familiar with these things. Wilson stared at Director Armitage, about that statue. And my nightmare. What do you really know? Wilson didn't beat around the bush and went straight to the topic. I haven't experienced it firsthand, sighed the abbot Amitic, but you're right. I understand what you're saying, it's a horror that doesn't belong to this world. We humans have always been able to gaze at this world with narrow eyes, and anything beyond our understanding can drive us crazy. But to some extent, this is protection. Once we cross that invisible barrier and witness the real world, we will find that our human world is just a leaf amidst a storm. What you see is an existence beyond the limits of human endurance. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. The Old Dominator. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. The Old Dominator, the Real World. Beyond the limits of human imagination. Director Armitage noticed that Professor Wilson was stunned for a while, and he could also express understanding. Poor Professor Wilson, you must have been scared. What Wilson cares about is completely different from what Director Armitage thinks. He frowned and pondered. Influenced by preconceptions, Nanko encountered the classic monster Gomorra on his first visit to this world. So the other side of the world that Professor Armitage mentioned next, Wilson subconsciously incorporated Ultraman's worldview. Why is Gomorra a existence beyond human imagination? If that's the case, wouldn't others go crazy when they see Gomorra? Like Professor Wilson before. Please, how could this be possible? Before his travels, Ultraman was a fan of works, all for kids to see. If Gomorra is the kind of terrifying existence that can drive people crazy, wouldn't children have to cry and parents complain? Even if people in this world have never seen Gomorra, they wouldn't be worried and nervous like this, would they? He wanted to speak up and refute, but suddenly remembered the crazy reaction of his human body. No, even if it's the first time you see a monster, you shouldn't be afraid to go crazy. He admitted that when Gomorra stood in front of him before, the overwhelming sense of oppression was really overwhelming. The real monster is indeed very scary, but he doesn't feel that it exceeds the limit that the human spirit can bear. Really? Wilson pondered the language, trying to recall the psychological state of the human body at that time. I don't know, it seems that after seeing that sculpture, my mental state became incredibly bad. But that's just an ordinary sculpture. No matter how evil and crazy something is carved, how much charm is expressed, it's just a sculpture. Wilson deliberately retorted, I think I have a strong psychological resilience, and no matter what kind of setback it may be, I cannot be knocked down. Even though I have experienced bankruptcy and a lot of emotional turmoil before, such words are too exaggerated. Every word he said deliberately expressed a strong suspicion. He plans to use this to provoke more intelligence from Director Amitic. No, all you know is just the surface, sighed Director Amitic. Do you think humans can carve things beyond their understanding? No, even the craziest people can only capture that hint of charm. But even if it's just a hint of charm, it's enough to make people fall into the same situation as the sculptor. Some people chase behind far beyond human life levels, numb and obsessed with following. Those beings are like gods to humans. Humans need a spiritual sustenance, so they created gods. However, many gods' images are derived from those who transcend humans, so it is not wrong to call them gods. They come from the ancient and long history, from the vast and profound universe. They were rulers of the old times, and Earth was once their paradise. They were also powerful and ancient beings in the universe, known as the Great Old Ones. There seems to be no problem with what Director Amitic said. Wilson raised an eyebrow. Gomorra does indeed originate from ancient times, and it has a name that is ancient dinosaurs. And many monsters also come from the universe. So, are those things that Director Amitic said referring to monsters? Great Old Ones. Forgive Nank, his English proficiency is so poor that he only managed to pass the low score on the C2.64 times back then. Although blessed with human memories and physical habits, it is only through hard work that one can understand the daily conversations of others. These dialogues were translated into his mind as dry machine translation, and if they were proverbs or proprietary phrases with special meanings that Wilson had known before, Nanko could also understand their meanings. But there is no suitable vocabulary in Wilson's memory to explain the unfamiliar noun phrase that Director Amitic mentioned. Nank can only rigidly rely on each word to translate. Monsters are a very old group, Great Old Ones, no problem at all. Many monsters have existed for much longer than humans. Some of them have lived on Earth since ancient times, while others are powerful monsters born in the universe. He remembers that there were also many humans in the Ultraman plot who worshipped monsters as gods. For example, treating the underwater primitive Lagong as the deity Dagon, and many monster prototypes also come from myths and legends. The words spoken by Armitage were strangely different from what Wilson had imagined, but inexplicably met in a strange place. The power of the former rulers far exceeded human imagination, and ordinary humans would go crazy just by witnessing a corner of the truth in the universe. However, there are still some alien races, ancient civilizations, or crazy mysterious religions who worship them and hope to gain their power. The sculpture you see is likely a statue of the old rulers, which is why it caused you such a deep madness and disaster. I see. Wilson nodded solemnly. Based on what Director Amitic said, Wilson realized that this world is likely to be very different from the normal Ultraman universe. The terms used to refer to monsters are completely different. And in this world, the power of monsters can cause mental harm to humans. Is this caused by any pollution in the system? Wilson really wanted to ask all these questions, and he also understood that Director Armitage might not know anything. He hesitated and chose another question. Since the old rulers are so powerful, is there any existence that opposes them? Wilson wants to know if Director Amitic is aware of Ultraman's existence. Generally speaking, isn't Ultraman the one who opposes monsters? That's right. In ancient times, elder gods fought against their former rulers and imprisoned and exiled them. They generally held good intentions towards humanity and assisted humanity in opposing their former rulers. Director Amitic sighed slightly, but who knows the thoughts of those great beings? They may not care about small humans, but they are just in opposition to the old rulers in their stance. Wilson nodded with a serious expression. In fact, he was harboring internal slander. Elder gods, the name of the older god. Sounds a bit awkward. Ultraman sounds a bit more pleasing to the ear. End of this chapter.